Today we are having a difficult conversation on evolving love. A conversation that puts the safety of our children in the spotlight. This is a different episode to our usual conversations, but it is one we have been wanting to have for years, a chance to use our platform and reach to shine a light on the most uncomfortable of topics, child sexual abuse. To help us navigate this conversation, we've invited on child safety expert Kristi McVee. Kristy was a specialist child interviewer and detective senior constable for 10 years in the Western Australian Police Force. With this comes an extraordinary and inarguable expertise in a world that, if you find yourself lucky, will never be directly exposed to. Since leaving the police force, she has worked to provide parents, caregivers, and guardians with the education, tools, and strategies they need to protect children from child sexual abuse and work towards a safer future for all kids. Kristy has written a book entitled Operation Kidsafe and hosts the podcasts Conversations with Kristy. As parents, we can become obsessed with the little things. Are they having too much sugar? Do we need to put a jacket on them so they don't get cold? But maybe we are spending our time worrying about the wrong thing. Why is he showing a special interest in my child? Why did he offer to spend time with my child so my partner and I could have a break? We have been stressed after all, and they have such a good connection. This is the time to ask the hard questions. By learning about grooming, we have a tool and an increased awareness of how we can actually be protective parents, protective fathers, protective mothers, protective friends. We can prevent rather than retaliate. We can be better equipped to avoid the unthinkable. This topic and conversation is uncomfortable. But isn't our children's safety more important than our discomfort? A few months ago, we posted an episode entitled The Hardest Conversation of All that drew awareness to Australian research that showed 1 in 6 Australian men harbour sexual feelings towards children. After releasing this episode, we received pushback, arguing the research, often downplaying the research and its findings. Let me state this clearly. I'm simply not interested in arguing whether it is 1 in 6 or 1 in 7. So here are some of the facts that come to light in this interview with Kristy. She references the Australian Child Maltreatment Study, a study that I've linked in the show notes. 28.5% of Australians have experienced child sexual abuse. 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys will be sexually abused by the time they are 18 years of age. 95% of this abuse is perpetrated by men. We must address this. Just like the issue of male domestic violence, men have a crucial role to play in this discourse. Men must speak up. Men must hold other men accountable. We must not remain silent. How often have you heard, "I'd kill the man if I found out it happened"? I've said this. And I've heard other men say this too. It is a strong statement of our inner desire to protect our families. But what does it achieve if it occurs after the fact? If we want to be real men and protect our communities and children, we need to educate ourselves. Prevention over reaction. And we must also remember this: child abuse is not political. It happens to the children of liberals, to conservatives. It happens in soccer teams, in churches. It happens with the friends of parents. It happens with our own relatives. This is not a partisan issue. This is not an issue exclusive to Australia or America or India or wherever you may find yourself listening to this conversation. Please listen to this conversation. I assure you that it will make your children and community safer. Use this to start a conversation with your wife, your husband, your family, and your friends. We owe it to each other. And most of all, we owe it to our children. And with that, we join the conversation with Kristy sharing about how she found herself in this line of work.
I kind of fell into it, if want for a better explanation. So I had my daughter at 28. So I've been with my husband since I was 15 years old. We've been, nearly 30 years next year together. And we've been together for so long, but we waited quite a while to have kids. I actually didn't think I wanted children. And so when I did finally decide to have a child, it was one and done, and happy to be, have this beautiful baby that I wanted to be a really great parent to. And I was actually quite scared to be a parent because I had some childhood trauma in my background, and it made me really scared to be a parent because I didn't think I knew how to be a good parent. So I didn't really want kids. And then we have this beautiful baby girl. And then I saw an ad for the police, the West Australian Police, in my local newspaper saying we want female police officers, flexible working arrangements, all these exciting things about the job. And I thought, I could do that. And every time I told people that I wanted to become a police officer, they laughed at me because I'm only 5'1", and I'm very short. But and that just made me more determined. So I thought I'm going to do this. I ended up getting into the police in 2010 when my daughter was 2 years old. So she was, I'd already set on this pathway. And when I got into the police, straight away, I started investigating or helping investigate with the detectives child sexual abuse. And then a year into my career, I put my hand up to become a specialist child interviewer. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's a specially trained position in the police that interviews children and people with special needs in regards to any sexual abuse or abuse that may have occurred to them, or if they've witnessed something serious like I also helped interview kids who'd witnessed serious offences like murders and things like that. So my career kind of just went down that pathway. My daughter was 3 by that stage, and then by the 4th year in the police, I was like, I want to be a detective. I don't want to just be the one that helps the detectives. I want to be a detective. So I became a detective again, put my hand up to go to the child abuse squad. I was investigating historical child sexual abuse, a lot of historical child sexual abuse from years gone by, but also present child sexual abuse cases. And then towards the end of my career, I was in the police for 10 years. So I left in 2020, but the last 2 years I was in a regional centre, so a smaller town, and I was interviewing children, investigating cases, arresting and charging offenders, and then also managing child sex offenders when they left prison. So I was completely engulfed in that world. And I did do other cases and helped on other things, but that was predominantly what I was doing. So when I did leave the police, I just kept thinking, why don't parents and adults see what I see? Why can't they see what's happening? Because it's very obvious when you do that. When you're interviewing the child and they're telling you how it all occurred, and you're interviewing the adults around that child and they're saying, well, we didn't see the signs. And so I just kept thinking, people just don't know what to watch out for. I need to teach them this. So that's how I kind of fell into this work. I did end up leaving the police with PTSD. That much abuse and trauma is going to leave its mark. I would say it wasn't actually from hearing the cases and helping the kids. It was more from the fact that the justice system there's no justice in the justice system. And it's such a hard system to work within. There are so many restrictions. Offenders and perpetrators of abuse don't have those rules, and they can do whatever they want, yet you have to stay within these guidelines, which is there's good reason for that, but it's also very hard as mentally. And so I wrote a book when I left. I started off with some ideas, and then it became a book, and the rest is history. Here I am 5 years later, all over social media, and people know who I am when I walk in the street, and I didn't even think this would ever happen.
Well, these are such crucial conversations to be having as parents. We're parents of a 6-year-old boy, and these are conversations that we're seeing start to happen more and more, as our kids go to school and as the parent community hopefully starts to engage in these really difficult conversations. For today's conversation, we really wanted to talk specifically about grooming and focus on that, because I think it's a conversation where if parents don't necessarily know what to look out for or even know what grooming is, it can become a really dangerous situation for everyone. So maybe we could start there. Could you explain to us a little bit about what grooming is?
Yeah, so I guess the best way to explain it is, well, if you've never heard the term love bombing, but it's kind of like love bombing, but in the way that the person who is wanting to abuse a child is basically conducting like being predatory towards a child, but also to the family, because they want the family to trust them, and they're preparing that child or young person for the abuse. It's a perverse. The amazing Amanda Sonodo calls it a perverse form of courtship. It's like basically preparing, like dating, but it's perverse because it's between an adult and a child usually. So those behaviours and that befriending of that child and establishing a relationship and an emotional connection with that child. But it also, it happens in different ways. So, there's around 6 different steps in it, but sometimes it can be really fast depending on the relationship between the child and the person, or it can go slower depending on, the restrictions or the supervision that the child has. So first of all, the perpetrator or the groomer has to find a victim, and it has to be a child that it's not just, they don't just pick any child. They're looking for certain characteristics. The child might lack support, friends. They might be vulnerable in some way, such as have a disability or have a lack of self-esteem. They're looking for the right victim in that. And it's not always the case. If the perpetrator is someone in the family, they can just pick the child that's closest to them. But for the most part, they're looking for a child that's not going to be the word I'm looking for is most likely not to speak up and dob on them, so to speak, because they don't want to get caught. They're not looking to be caught or go through and be charged with this. So they're trying to find the right victim. Generally, they know what to look out for, so they're looking out for those kids that are quite vulnerable. Then they want to gain the child's trust, so they are going to gift them things. They're going to fill a need. So if the child's lacking self-esteem or friends, they're going to be that person that child turns to and can talk about anything with. If they're a child that is lacking support from their parents, they're going to fill that parental role in a way and build them up. I've got some really great friends who've been victims of this, and one of them was a victim in a group home, and he was always told he was really handsome and all the kids look to you and you're such a leader, and this perpetrator built him up to believe that he was, to believe him, and then he used that to abuse him. So that's generally how that starts to begin with. It's that love bombing that happens in that relationship. But they might be doing to the parents something different. So if there's parents or caregivers, they might be talking about how the child needs support and how the child needs a guiding hand, and I can be that person for them and I can help you with them, and they just need like a positive role model, or it depends on the relationship again, but they can be saying this to the parents, and that they might start planting seeds of doubt in the parent's mind about whether the child is trustworthy and they are lying. So they're putting a wedge between the parent or the caregiver and the child, so that the child doesn't feel safe to go to the parent and the parent doesn't believe the child. But they also feel a need, so they will, do babysitting, take them on camping trips, they'll have them for sleepovers, they'll be the one that taxis them around, wants to have special one-on-one time with them all the time, and makes the child and the parents feel grateful to that person. Then they isolate them with, like I said, with putting that wedge between them. But if they're giving a treat to this young person or this child that they might not be allowed to have, say, for instance, they're 12 and they're being given alcohol, by this perpetrator, or if they're being shown pornography, it's not like they can go to their parent and say, hey, such and such has given me alcohol, because the parent's going to go, well, why did you do that? Or why did you take that? Or, why are you looking at that? They might feel like they can't go to that adult. And it's, again, isolating that child from their support network and making it harder to speak up. And then, in that process, especially if there's they'll show pornography to them. They'll talk about sex. They'll talk about sexual behavior. Have you ever had a kiss before? Who's your first boyfriend? Have you ever masturbated? They'll encourage them to do risky things and investigate. And I mean, everyone is a sexual being, right? So even children as young as 3 can, and 2 and 3 can be masturbating, and because they know that their genitals feel good and they know that there's nothing wrong with that. But they will use that against them and make it so that first of all, if the conversations between the parent and the child haven't been open and honest and explaining all of these things to the child, then they might be the first person that's ever talked about this stuff, and they've been interested because they're like, yeah, I know that it feels good, but no one said anything to me, and I didn't know I was allowed to talk about this stuff. So like they might introduce concepts that they've never heard of, or I've seen perpetrators and groomers give sex toys to children, and it's all a part of the sexualizing that relationship between that person, the groomer, and the child. And then the abuse happens, and in that process they're constantly testing the child to see if they will actually tell someone. So they're encouraging them to never speak to anyone else about this stuff. It's just our little secret. But they also are waiting to see if the child actually does say anything to anyone else before they go to the phase of actually sexually abusing them. And I will caveat this with sexual abuse isn't penetrative sex in every way, like there is other ways that children are abused without there ever being any sort of penetrative sexual contact. So it's all of it is, any type of sexualized behaviors are, child sexual abuse. So sometimes it never gets to that point. The groomer or a predator might not even ever do that, but then it can get to that point as well. So, and then they've got to maintain control. So they've got to make sure that the child doesn't tell anyone. So then there will be threats. They'll try and manipulate the child into believing that no one will listen to them, no one will believe them. No, your mum won't love you anymore if you tell them. I've seen predators threaten to kill their family, kill their pets, in order to keep them quiet about the abuse. So it's quite damaging and perverse. It turns something that shouldn't, first of all, happen to a child, but second of all, it turns everything that they knew. This person was like their biggest advocate and seemed like their biggest friend and support, then becomes their biggest nightmare on the back end of all of the abuse, because they want to keep their secret. And I do see and speak to victims who have, it's been a parent that's abused them, and it's really hard for them to identify or to their parent can be the most loving of parents, and then they abuse them when no one else is around. And then they go back to this loving, amazing, parent. So it's really the psychological damage and emotional damage done can be quite damaging and quite prolonged. It doesn't. For most children, they just want it to stop. It's not until you become an adult do you realise that how badly it affects every part of your life after the fact.
An incredibly complex web of manipulation. By the sounds of this, it's like grooming starts with the parents looking for sort of this like ideal situation where there's some vulnerability at play. Are there certain characteristics that a predator might look for in a child as far as like gauging whether or not the child might have body safety education or like awareness around their body being private, or just how they conduct themselves? Are they sort of looking for things like that?
From my experience and from what I've speaking to sex offenders, speaking to children and adults, a lot of predators will they won't target children who are confident. Because a confident child's going to speak up. A confident child's going to offer resistance. In fact, there's some research from somewhere in Queensland at a prison. They spoke to sex offenders in prison and basically said, what stopped you from abusing a child? And 84% said that it was the child's resistance. So the child offered resistance in some way, shape or form. It could have been that they said no. It could have been that they were knew about their body safety, and they knew that it wasn't okay, it was inappropriate, and they, were quick to go and tell someone about what was going on. And in my experience, that is exactly what happened. The children who knew about body safety and had open conversations and a relationship with a safe adult, those children would speak up quicker and it would be shut down faster. Whereas the children who didn't have that education or didn't have that safe adult in their lives, they were the ones who, it went on for years. So I think the thing is that they're looking for that vulnerable child who won't speak up. And the ones that do, and I've, again, spoken to survivors, and I spoke to a survivor who said, yes, I got someone tried it on, but I was too quick to, speak up and tell my parents, and I never saw that person again. So, it's interesting, I guess, from my perspective is that my goal is that no child ever gets abused. But at the same time, I think we can't stop that always, because there's always that exception to the rule. One of them being that, we identify that there's 3 types of sex offenders. One is the predatory sex offender. They're, they have an attraction to children, and they are, generally don't actually have relationships with adults. They struggle to have a hold or have relationships with other adults because their attraction is purely to children. And there's different types of, age groups that they're attracted to, etc. Then there's the opportunistic offender, or they have both an attraction to children and attraction to adults. They can maintain a relationship with an adult and then abuse children as well. And then the last one is situational. Situational offenders generally aren't attracted to children, but something happens in their life and they go and abuse a child to maintain control, to feel strong, like feel powerful, etc. So that situational offender, even if a child puts up resistance, they're going to go push through that anyway. They're going to be more forceful. And I have said this before, but, not all child sexual abuse hurts a child. And it's not all that typical, we think, rape or like forced abuse. Sometimes the groomer is so good at grooming the child that the child doesn't even know that they're being groomed and abused.
It's like forming that attachment with the abuser, and sort of the abuser creating an environment where the child really feels like they're an active participant, like they really are a part of this and wanting this.
Correct. Yeah, I've seen children as young as 6 get into what they think is a romantic relationship with their abuser, and it goes on for years. And then when it finally gets found out, the child is struggling to assimilate the fact that this person's actually abused them and it's not actual real romantic love. And it's so damaging.
Yeah.
Well, Kristy, you mentioned before the research that was done in Queensland, and I think it's important just to take a moment to talk about the prevalence of all of these things happening. Of course, you're speaking about this, and in your former work as a detective, you were dealing with this all the time. So you were almost in a world that was surrounding you. Yep. But for some parents who might not necessarily have had conversations with people who have suffered child abuse or themselves suffered child abuse, they may never have had these conversations before.
Yeah.
And often when we bring up subjects around this in the podcast or in Abby's writing, some people can become very defensive, almost saying, look, this isn't really that big of an issue. It doesn't happen that much, or it's, it can kind of almost become a political conversation where it becomes like, oh, not all men, or, that kind of logical argument. So what I'd love for you to do is to talk to kind of the prevalence and some of the trends that you've noticed with your work.
I mean, look, I get those comments as well. So it's not that people don't want to admit that this is actually an issue. And that's why we're here in 2025 still having such a big issue. So statistically, the Australian Child Maltreatment Study, which came out 18 months ago, first of its kind, was able to give us up-to-date statistics around child sexual abuse. Now, from that, we are able to say that 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys will be sexually abused by the time they reach 18. 1 in 4 Australians, over 1 in 4, it's 28.5% of adult Australians walking around in the street have been sexually abused. And we know that over 90% of child sexual abuse happens from someone known to the child. It's not some stranger in a white van giving out lollies or at the park, trying to get your child to go with them home. It's someone known to them. Some of the other statistics off the top of my head is for girls, 47% of abuse is by an immediate family member or non-immediate family member. 25% will be by someone non-immediate, so it will be a grandparent, a uncle or a cousin, that sort of relationship or step. 15% will be a father or a stepfather, and 5 to 6% will be a brother or stepbrother. We also know that 30 to 50% of child sexual abuse is done by other children. So we call that harmful sexualized behaviours in Australia, and that's quite often justified by adults as kids just being kids. But the thing is that, it's harmful, especially if there's no consent, there's no mutual understanding of what's happening, of wanting to do the whatever it is. And what we're seeing now is an increase in children harming each other from the fact that they see inappropriate and adult content online. It's increased exponentially, and they're seeing adult content, and and then they're doing it to their siblings or younger children that they know of. Quite often, and in the research, we see that children who are being harmed are usually aged between 3 and 10. The children who are harming are between 10 and 15. So, there's some variations in that, but, we know that kids around puberty who are having access to pornography are then going and doing what they see in porn on other children. It's always been happening. It's not that it's just happened now. It's always happened, but we know now. We're now talking about it.
How can we differentiate what is the early stages of grooming behavior, this sort of attention, the love bombing, and say the loving attention, the innocent of a family member, of a loving grandparent?
I guess from my perspective, when you teach body safety to kids and you learn about body safety, you learn about the body safety rules, which is my body is my body. No one's allowed to touch my body, take photos of my body, or look at my body unless, for certain reasons, like if a nurse or doctor needs to, if they're younger and they're a toddler, you might be helping them change a nappy, but we'd be explaining what we're doing to them. We'd be saying, hey, I'm going to change your nappy now. I'm going to wipe your bottom. I'm putting this cream on. Okay, put your time to cover up. Like, we would just be explaining every part of that. We wouldn't be touching them without that sort of for little people. For older kids, we'd be offering them the opportunity to do it for themselves, with us to assist if we need to. Hey, here's the wipe. Do you want to try and wipe for yourself? Do you need help? Okay. So, and then from a certain age, we would be saying, okay, no one's allowed to touch your private parts. The mouth is a private part as well. Most people don't realize that the mouth is a private part, but abusers use that to their advantage. These are all the proper terminology. We use full anatomical correct names all the time because, again, groomers use that as a game to gamify abuse for little kids. And then we are also telling them that, you have the right to feel safe. We're teaching them about their early warning signs. What's it feel like when we feel safe? So that warm feeling, that fuzzy feeling, my heart feels bigger. It's like a big warm hug. Well, what's it feel like when you feel unsafe? I get butterflies in my tummy, my knees start to shake, I get a headache, or I can't speak properly. And then when we feel unsafe or when we feel those feelings, who can we talk to about that? We want to go and tell a safe adult. And it could be about anything. It could be about going to school, you get those feelings. Okay, well, what's going on for you there? But it could be about some person that's making you feel like that. So it's kind of like a scaffolding. We scaffold these lessons on, and as they get to understand and have the language to explain their feelings, and then we talk about inappropriate and appropriate behaviours. Well, no one's allowed to touch, take a photo, or look at our privates. They're our privates, right? There's an exception to that. Some parents and kids like to have showers and baths together. But again, we're doing that with that bodily autonomy and respect of our children. When they choose not to anymore and they don't want to anymore, it's their choice. If they want to hug you or not, it's their choice. I had an argument with my daughter a couple of weeks ago. She's nearly 18 now, and because she's so confident in her rights as an individual, she said, I don't want you in my room anymore. Can you please leave? And I was like, that was hard because I was in the middle of an argument with her. You know, we were arguing over something teenage-wise, and I was like, and I had to leave. Like, that was her right for me not to be in that space.
Yeah.
And as adults, we should always, first of all, respect our child's boundaries and know and consent. But second of all, model what it's like for a safe adult to respect those boundaries. Because when another adult doesn't respect them, that's going to set off a warning sign. And that's going to be when they come to you and say, Nana is making me hug her and I don't want to. She smells funny, you know, like whatever it is. I'm just making a joke out of that. But I remember when my daughter was young and when she didn't have the language to say, I don't give consent, she used to say, stop it, I don't like it. And then it was, stop it, I don't give you permission. And then it was, stop it, I don't give you consent. And so it progressed from there. The first, like when she was 3, stop it, I don't like it, and put her hand up, and we taught her that. And so I would advocate for her and say, if an adult continued, sometimes grandparents don't pick up the cue, or they don't respect the cue. I used to have to say, she said stop. And then because then I was setting that, but she was setting the boundary, I was enforcing it for her. That's my job as a parent.
Yes.
And then from there, when an adult continues and keeps pushing, then we need to have a conversation. Are you not listening for a reason? And I would always put it back on the adult. She said stop. Is there a reason you're still continuing? And then they would have to explain to me why they were, not listening to her boundary. It basically cut people off at the knees, because they wouldn't continue after that, because they knew, first of all, she would speak up, and I would be backing her up. I would never, ever not back her up with that. And some of the instances that worked really well is that, tickling. Grandparents like to tickle kids, and she would then got very good at enforcing her own boundaries, and I was just there as like that backstop if anything continued. So we can, with older parents or with other people, I have a blog post that says, is it inappropriate behavior or is it grooming? And the reason and how I differentiate the two, and it might not be 100%, is that when it's inappropriate behavior and the person might be immature, or they just don't, they've never had anyone call them out on their behaviors, etc., they will generally, if they realize that they're the ones acting inappropriately, they will probably stop and apologize. They will try and say, hey, didn't realize, if they're a mature adult, or if they realize that they've done the wrong thing. Grandparents are really good for that. They'll be like, oh, sorry, I didn't realize. Oh, yeah. But when someone continues, or they then gaslight you back and say, oh, well, why are you being like that? Like, kids today. And, one thing that tells me is they might not be grooming, but they're actually not a safe adult.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a remarkably insightful answer that you just gave. I think one thing that is really important that we try to remember as well is that obviously kids who can't advocate for their own safety, like it is fantastic that we hope that we're instilling like a really strong sense of bodily safety that our son feels, and obviously your daughter, and you're talking to her all about this, but a lot of parents aren't having those conversations. And so what is the role of other parents who might be spotting behaviors that could potentially be grooming? Because it's such a difficult thing, because of course, part of the reason why people don't have these conversations is because they're worried about the stigma associated by actually pointing out behavior that might be untoward. And that might even be within a family context. You go, oh, that's just the uncle. He's a bit handsy. Like maybe we shouldn't say anything about him. Like it might make him feel embarrassed. And it's almost like we're protecting them. And it becomes, of course, really dangerous, or,
hugely dangerous.
So how do we engage in kind of almost advocating for other people when we're entering into these discussions?
This is a really good question, and I love it because I have been in this situation so many times. I guess, having the background that I've had and, being a parent whilst being a detective and doing all of this work and being a parent, I've been around so many children. I mean, a lot of parents obviously entrusted me with their kids. I had kids who I coached for netball and my daughter's friends and everything. So how I would do it is obviously always model a safe adult behavior. So, you know, not ever asking kids to keep secrets, always being open and honest with them, talking about early warning signs and feelings, you know, and talking about the fact that some things aren't appropriate. You know, it's not appropriate for adults to ever make you do things that you don't want to do within reason. You know, obviously if the teacher's asked you to do something, but if it's something that you know goes against your bodily safety rights, or it goes against, you know, your overall safety, then you don't have to do it, and you don't have to. So I had, you know, sometimes I had massive conversations with the kids that I was teaching at netball. They'd ask me a question and it would turn into this massive like conversation around, you know, appropriate, inappropriate behaviors, safe and unsafe behaviors, you know, what to do if something happens. You know, sometimes it's about, you know, if you have a child in your life that is potentially doesn't have someone to go to, it's being that person for them to be able to come to you and say, hey, like, you know, if anything ever happens, you know that you can always tell me. I'm here to listen to you and to be here if you ever need me. I mean, it puts you in, if it's not a child from your family, or if it's not, you know, sometimes you end up being the ostracized one for being that person who stands up for kids, but I'd rather be that person than not.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to model really safe behaviors, talk about safe, inappropriate and appropriate, use that language, safe and unsafe, appropriate and inappropriate. I used to call adults out. Hey, it's not appropriate to talk like that around children. It's inappropriate to act like that. Hey, it's not appropriate for adults to be in change rooms with children. What are you doing in here? You know, I would call that behavior, and I would use those exact terms, because it's so direct and it's quite slap in the face if you're the person doing it. It's almost like, well, you've got nowhere to go after that. How can you explain your behavior if you've been called inappropriate?
Oh my gosh, spot on. So what would you do if you just say you're a parent and you suspect that, you know, you've been witnessing grooming behavior, and then, you know, just like you mentioned the change room situation, like just say, you know, there's an adult who is, you know, ends up in a bathroom or something by accident with a child. What, you know, and you haven't seen anything, you don't know, you haven't witnessed abuse, but, you know, you've been watching certain behavior, and now there's like, say, there's some one-on-one access that's been given where there's an adult alone now with a child. As somebody who's aware of that, what is the next step, like legally, or like what would you do?
Personally, again, like I said, I would probably intervene. I would stay close. If I was watching someone and I thought they look like they're grooming this child, or there's some red flags for me, you know, it might be your spidey senses, but you don't actually know. I would be putting myself closer to the situation and just paying attention. I would intervene if I thought that it was inappropriate. I'd call out the inappropriate behavior. Hey, it's inappropriate for an adult and child to be in this change room. Is there a reason you're here? And then usually they'll dive straight out of there. They wouldn't even stay around for long, or if they're really confident in their abuse, because some of them do, they've been doing this for a long time, they'll fight back. And I would just stand there and wait, because, you know, but that's me, because I feel confident in this. And I don't care if I upset an adult. I don't care if I upset people. And if I would generally, sometimes the person displaying this behavior, if they're trying to maintain their standing in the community, they're going to go and badmouth you. They're going to make you look like the crazy one in case you go and tell anyone. But I would just, from that, if it was in like a club situation, or like in a situation like a family situation, you know, I have seen it happen multiple times. The person who steps in as a safe adult and the protective adult is the one who looks like the nutter. Like they get bad-mouthed, gaslit, and totally turned into the bad guy because they stood up to the person. And it happens time and time again, because that is the MO of the perpetrator, of the groomer, in order to keep themselves safe. So they're going to make you look crazy. So it's always a handy thing to ensure there's other witnesses, ensure that you call it out loud and outside of, like, you know, as in if you bring it to someone's attention, you're doing it in front of other people. Hey, what were you doing in that bathroom with that with little Kristy? Like, you know, it's not appropriate to do that, right? Like, I don't see why you were in there. You know,
absolutely.
And then whatever excuse they give you, just leave it at that and just let everyone else mull over it, because a lot of people don't realize that this is just how they they act and behave, and it's normalized, and they've normalized it in their groups.
The abuser is also normalizing it with the parents as well. And it becomes a very difficult thing, of course, because you can draw attention to something as, another adult. But if the parent is not receptive to what you're witnessing, then it becomes an extremely difficult dynamic.
100%.
So what would be your suggestions in those types of situations?
My suggestion would be, if you have the opportunity to speak to the young person, is to pull them aside and say, hey, just letting you know that that's not actually appropriate behavior by adults. And if anything, and unfortunately, we have to allow for people to make their own choices, even children at sometimes. Like, as an interviewer, a child interviewer, I used to see children I knew were being abused, but they wouldn't speak up because of the grooming or because they didn't feel safe to talk. Children have to feel safe in order for them to disclose abuse. And if you have the opportunity to become someone that they feel safe with, then you're more likely to be the person they disclose to. But you can't force a disclosure. You can't force a child to say anything. You can't force anyone, any adult or person to say anything unless they're ready to do so. So all you can do is model safe adult behavior, provide a safe space for them to feel safe. So giving them an opportunity, letting them know that you're there for them, just making sure that they understand that you're always, they can come to you about anything, whether it's someone in your family or someone in a sporting group or wherever. I would like to see more sporting groups and organisations have a child safety officer that practices these. It is legislated in Victoria that they have to have a child safety officer, and there's a few other states that are legislating child safety. Or, if you're an organisation with children involved in it, it's part of their curriculum, part of their procedures, policies, etc. But it's just, I think, being that safe adult that they can come to, providing them a safe space, and just letting them know that you're always there if they need you.
Kristy, why do you think some parents would want to stay silent or ignore or not accept information when they have been warned, or somebody's said, have you thought maybe this is a potentially unsafe situation with this other adult in your child's life? Why would a parent who loves their children so much, why would they have a resistance and a denial of that information?
I've got a few answers to this, but I think the predominant one is that when this is a really difficult thing to navigate, right? Especially if it's someone in the family, if someone's known to them, it might be even their partner or, someone close to them, right? They then have to do something. And maybe they're not ready to do it. Maybe it's part, but they don't know what to do. For me, I've never stepped away from hard, but a lot of people don't like to do anything hard. So we see parents who are, and I'm not here to guilt any parents, but we see parents who choose easy over hard all the time. And imagine you might love your children, but you're not willing to do the hard stuff, and that means not protecting your child. And a lot of parents a lot of parents justify, well, it happened to me, I turned out okay. Whether it be about anything, right? Not just about child sexual abuse. But I think, for a lot of people who are in these situations, like I said, it's quite often someone known to them. So then they've got to do a hard thing, which is go against their family, go against their loved one. And that means stepping up for your child and advocating for your child, which puts you at a disadvantage, because if that's the person who is the breadwinner in the home, or if that's the person who, you've got this unhealthy, toxic relationship with your family and you don't know how to get out of it yourself, so let alone trying to protect your child from it, there's a lot of hard in stepping up and protecting your kids. So I think a lot of people aren't really good at that.
And I imagine it would also be like an affront on your own parenting as well, that you might have been blindsided or weren't, something's come under the radar, and it's like questioning your parenting.
I've had a lot of parents where I've had to step in and say, when I was a detective especially, their child would be in front of me because of a mandatory report. So, they would have told a teacher or someone that had to mandatory report it, and then they haven't gone to their parent. They've gone to someone else because that was the person that felt safest. And then the parent's like, oh, well, I was abused and this, and then they make it about themselves. And, I've had to sit there and go, I'm sorry, but this isn't about you right now. You need to be here for your child and go and deal with your own stuff outside of this, because your child needs you to be there to support them.
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people haven't done the work, the internal work, the spiritual work, the soul work, to be able to be there for their kids in that space and to hold space for them when they're going through something like this. So then it becomes about them and everything that it has happened to them.
With the mandatory reporting, what's the law around, a child disclosing to an adult that this has happened? Is there like a time frame of like when somebody should go to the police? Like, what's the process? Just say your child has made a disclosure to you. What do you do then?
I mean, there is some child safeguarding legislation throughout Australia. It's not in every state. So I think in Queensland, if you don't report child sexual abuse to the police, then you could actually be charged with not safeguarding your child.
Yeah.
But it's not in every state. So it would be state by state. But mandatory reporting obviously holds teachers, doctors, nurses, people who work with children, early childhood educators, at a standard that if a child reports or discloses abuse to them, whether it be physical or sexual, that they have to report it to the mandatory reporting platform, and and mandatory reporting then report it onto police and child protection. So it's like bare minimum they have to do it within 24 hours, I believe, or 48 hours maximum.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it like weeks after, which is ridiculous because there's children at risk. But they can get fined or go to jail. I haven't seen anyone that happen to yet.
Mm-hmm.
But there is mandatory reporting laws for a reason. And like people like to complain about the fact that they're forced to do things. But the reason why we have mandatory reporting laws is because people didn't do the right thing.
Obviously, the kids' safety is the most important thing to us. And in terms of the way in which we kind of look at risk and different situations that our kids might be in. Now, of course, there's going to be inherent risk in anything, getting in the car, doing all these types of things. But how do we as parents balance the risk? So say, for example, your kid really loves sport and a particular coach has said that your kid's, super successful and, maybe would give some special extra attention. And in your mind you go, oh, that does seem a little odd, but, within the bounds of sport and coaching, this might be totally fine.
Yeah.
So it's how do we reconcile kind of balancing risk and still allowing our kids to have different experiences?
I would be more involved in like your child's club and sporting. For me personally, my daughter did netball, pony club, she had horses, we did showing, we did all sorts of sports over the years. And what I did was I just got involved. So I was always around. I went on pony club camps and I was just there in the background as helping supervise kind of thing, being that safe adult for all kids around me. I mean, if more parents got involved in their kids' sport, then more sporting associations and clubs would be grateful. You don't have to be hands-on. You could be one of the people in the canteen, or you could be one of the, handing out checking people in. You don't actually have to, do it all. But I think it's also a great way for kids to be in sport, but you actually have a bit more, like you can be in the periphery and, help your child be developed and get that development, but you're also always there. So hopefully no one attempts that. And, that research from that Queensland prison said 84% said the child resistance, but 16% was the protective parent. And I've actually, shared a video of a pedophile who said, I looked for children whose parents weren't around. They weren't involved. He was a basketball coach and a basketball referee. And he used to take children under his wing and then he would abuse them. And he said, I was looking for kids whose parents weren't around. I was looking for kids whose mostly dads, especially for that predatory, because he was abusing boys. And the thing that the big perception that we have is it's mostly girls. And yes, girls are more likely to be abused than boys, but it's only a difference by, 1 in 5 boys, 1 in 3 girls. Not like it's not a lot more. And so boys are just at risk in these scenarios than anyone else. And, these predators especially if they're attracted to children, they don't really care about gender. They just care about the access. So make it harder for them to have access. Make it harder for your young person, whether a boy or girl or, whatever, to not be alone with people who could harm them. And I know that that's hard for, working parents and stuff like that. Okay, well, get to know the other parents around and create like a safety network of people around your child or children. Take turns taking them to sport. Take turns keeping them, keeping an eye on everything. Have conversations about, what your expectations are. And, you're just worried that, someone might get an idea. So, it would be really cool if we could just keep an eye on each other's kids because I did that for other people and people did that for me as well. So, it is possible.
And the wonderful thing about having conversations like this with other parents and acknowledging this is that if there are going to be people who are predators, they'll be listening to these. They'll go, okay, well, look, this group of parents, they're actually looking for that. Like this is a concern. So, I need to really not do that here. And I think also this talk about access, because as much as we have the body safety, all of that education, I think so much of this as parents comes down to the access because
100%.
The power dynamic is extreme, the manipulation is extreme, a child believing that they're participating in this and really limiting that access. And speaking, something that Liam and I do is we talk very openly, and I think this is why we've been criticized by people because we talk very openly about what our boundaries are in our family when it comes to our son. And, if he's not with...
I don't think that's I don't think people should be criticizing you because, there's a lack of boundaries in the world.
For sure. For me, when I hear the criticism, that's another red flag that goes off for me.
100%, yeah.
We have boundaries such as, and we're really fortunate, we have a lot of love and support. Our son, he's safe adults. Like if he's not with us, he's either with Liam's mum or he's with my mum and dad, but primarily under the care of my mum.
Yeah.
And that's not anything to do with my dad. We have a beautiful relationship with my dad. He's a safe, beautiful person. He's really involved, but it's just our family. It's just our family rule. It comes down to actually statistics because nearly every anecdotal story that I read, it's as you said, it's the grandparent, it's the stepfather, it's the uncle, it's these people.
Yep.
And there can be this like rose-colored glasses on that people can have when it's their own family member who they love so deeply themselves, I believe, to not want to actually witness that. And so that was a conversation that Liam and I had very early on. It's just become a blanket rule. And my father, when we told that rule to my parents, my dad was so supportive of that. He said, I totally understand that. This is statistics. And actually, as a grandfather, to him, it makes me feel really good as a grandparent that you have that boundary with me because it means that you have that boundary with the other people in his life. And it just hasn't been an issue. And actually, when you have these boundaries, I feel that it actually makes me feel more secure in my parenting because I'm not wondering what's happening. I'm not hoping for the best because I know what's going on and I know who he's with.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the opposite of the like looking out into the world as fear-mongering. The boundaries keep me feeling really confident in the relationships that we have because I'm not navigating who is with our son and is he safe.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I had the same conversations. And it's interesting because I had a question on TikTok is, with everything and it was from it was actually from a male who asked it to me, which was interesting because most of my followers and most of my supporters are females, and I do have a small portion of male supporters because in this space it's mostly mums who actually do the body safety education, the supervision, the protection, dads. And sadly, and I would love to see this change because we really do need dads to step up and be that supportive role model. But I have conversations with some of my male cohorts in this space and they're like, yeah, because, dads will say something like, if anything ever happened, I'd kill them, and then so how is that a safe environment to come to someone because you're worried that your dad will kill the person who's done something to you, right?
Yeah.
And children, they will listen and hear these sorts of conversations. But back to this question. So the question was, if with everything I know and seen, did I 100% trust my husband? And it was like, I had to really sit with it, right? And I was like, well, guess what? I can't lie to you. I didn't, because I had to do my due diligence and sit with, is he a safe adult? Have I seen any behaviors that are concerning? Does he respect boundaries? Boundaries is one of the first things and big red flags that someone will push if they aren't going to be safe, right? And I had to sit with it. It was a very short, analytical conversation inside my mind, a conscious discussion with myself. But I did have that. I had that with my daughter's grandparents, both on my side and my husband's side. I had it with all of the family, the extended family, the friends in our circle, the people around us. I did that with every person, and it sounds like you have too. And then I went, okay, where do I stand with these relationships and what am I comfortable with? Because like you, I had a conversation with my mother-in-law and said, I don't want my daughter ever left alone with any male relatives. And it's not because I don't trust them, but here's the thing. It's not everyone, but it can be anyone. And I saw enough cases and enough children came into my interview room that they had been abused by extended family, those non-immediate family members. It didn't happen to the parent because it was an immediate family member, but sometimes happens where, there's enough degree of separation that it seems okay to do it to that child, or they build this relationship with this child and it happens. I have no idea, I'm not in the space of psychology. So I think it's very smart. And I, like you, felt very secure because the boundaries were firm, solid. Everyone knew them. We knew when, and we put things in place to ensure that they were always kept, that access, that supervision. She always had someone with her in the toilet when in a public space. She was always with a person, she was never left with this cousin because we weren't sure, never left with these people. And it's not because I actually thought that they would do anything, but I couldn't live with myself if they did.
Exactly.
Yeah, Kristy, I completely agree that it is so important for men to start stepping into these conversations and it not just be women. And I think something that I think about is that if you're willing to take a scrutinous approach to these things, like if someone were to come up to Abby and say, okay, if they were to pose the question that someone on TikTok posed to you and said, how do you feel about your husband? I feel totally comfortable, Abby being as, taking a fine magnifying glass to any behaviors or having conversations with me because I have nothing to hide. Of course, if you have something to hide, there can be this resistance or this sense of pushback that someone might start to recognize. But sometimes within these conversations, and I think within the broader landscape of conversations that can become gendered, some men start to feel very reactive. And any kind of criticism of men or, in the broader scheme of things can have like a knee-jerk reaction of like, it's not everyone, it's not all of us, it's just a few bad eggs and that type of thing. So how do we bring men into this conversation in a way that we actually can eliminate some of that knee-jerk reaction? Because as men and as fathers, we can't just be going around saying we're going to kill anyone who does this. Even if that, like I can say for, I kind of feel like that. Like when you said that, I was like, I kind of do feel like that.
Yeah. But that's it. But
there's more nuance behind it. Ultimately,
exactly.
There is more nuance behind it when I explain it. But how do we bring men into this conversation better?
I guess it comes from the fact is that, do you want your family to feel like they can't come to you and be safe with you? It's about you looking at yourself. Like I personally always put it back on people. Like, it's not all men. Okay, well, if it's not all men, then who are they? What do they look like? Explain to me, how do they behave? Give me an example of who they are, because I can tell you now, and I don't, after they've tried to stumble through some of these questions, half the time I'm like, well, I can tell you now that they don't look like that pedophile that you have in your mind. Yeah, they are brothers and uncles and fathers and grandfathers and some mothers and some aunties and some women, but over 95% will be men. So if it's not all men, but it's a lot of men. Yes. And so tell me how to identify them, because and there's a really good analogy. I saw someone and they had six apple juices, right? And he talked about, what if I just tipped one of these apple juices out and peed in it, right? And then I mixed them around, and where's the pee? Like, how would I know which one was the pee? It's a very bad analogy.
Yeah.
But the way he explained it, and he's like, well, that's what it's like walking around in the world. Women have to try and work out which one's the urine, basically. Yeah. And so you don't know. They all look like apple juice. So, and I'm sure you can relate, Abby. Like we, I've got a daughter and I've had to sit down with her and say, look, these are the things that we need to worry about. Do you think my daughter who has, always been able to say what she thinks, has always been able to advocate for herself because we've enabled her to do that. I've always enabled her to have a voice. It's sometimes detrimental in the schooling system we have, but at the same time, I know that she's going to be okay at the other side of it. So I'm okay with that. But, she sort of said to me, Mum, and she was 10 years old at this stage. She said, Mum, why do I have to worry about men looking at me? She was 10 years old she'd gone away for the weekend with her nan to like the Crown Towers, which is in Perth here. And she was having a girls' weekend, and she was in her bikini and she was 10 years old and, starting puberty and all of the stuff that goes on at that age. And she called me crying that night going, Nan told me I had to cover up because men were looking at me. Why do I have to worry about that? Why can't they control themselves? She was 10.
Yeah.
And this is not something that I think as fathers and as men, is this what we want to like our young women and our children? If you're a dad of a boy or a girl, it does. And it seems to be the dad, have you ever heard the say, like men say, oh, now I've got a daughter, I understand. Well, why didn't you understand before?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Like why is it all of a sudden you're worried about your daughter, but you didn't worry about all of the women in your life? We've all been dealing with this.
Yeah.
So I always put it back and I'm like, okay, well, if it's not all men, tell me what men should I be worried about? Where should I find them? How do I see them?
Yeah.
And then also say to them, look, like you, Liam, you said, I didn't have anything to worry about because I know who I am internally. I know I'm a safe adult, a safe human adult man. My husband said the exact same thing. He goes, I'm not worried about you thinking that because I know who I am. I'm never going to be at risk. I'm never going to be a risk for my child.
Yeah,
for sure.
So go have at it.
Yeah.
And I also don't want to feel, if parents, friends of ours were to say, look, I don't feel comfortable with you spending any alone time with my child.
Why would you want to?
I would not take that as an affront to me being a safe person. It's like, that's great. Have the boundary. And it's like, I'm also not looking to have those interactions where I'm spending time one-on-one with someone's kid.
Yeah, exactly.
And for me as a father, that is the first red flag that I notice.
Yeah.
And, if I see other men start to isolate themselves with other children, that is something to me that immediately rings alarm bells.
Yeah,
me too.
And for me, that is a red flag that I'm glad that I can instantly recognize. And it's something that I immediately convey to Abby. I say, look, I've noticed this thing. Let's just keep an eye on it. Okay. Let's just see.
Let's be careful.
Let's just be careful. And I think all parents, all fathers or mothers need to start looking for these red flags.
And it's not something you have to go and immediately confront them with or anything like that. No. It's just, hey, I'm paying attention. I've noticed and I'm maintaining a kind of awareness. And then, I'm going to supervise. I'm going to stay close. I'm going to make sure that this person doesn't get further access to any children alone. Yeah. I'm going to step in if I see anything inappropriate, or I'm going to say something when and if they try it. One of the things I used to see or hear a lot of is like children being behind closed doors with an adult. To me, there is no reason for any child to be behind a closed door.
Totally.
In any room of any house of anywhere. It's a bit different when it's like a child with a principal and they're having a meeting. But to me, if I was a principal, I'd want to make sure that there was glass and it was open and everyone could see what was going on. For me, I'm thinking, safety management and safety risk management and harm reduction, etc. So it's the same with, and it's funny because, that question about, my husband, he was like, I don't care that you had to think about that. He goes, if you didn't, you wouldn't be doing your job.
Yeah. It makes me think of sleepovers and like how I would feel if there was a child and their family wanted their child to come and have a sleepover with us. Now, I actually wouldn't feel comfortable with that because not because of Liam, but because I wouldn't feel comfortable with my own child going and having a sleepover at a house where there's dad or older brothers or whatnot. And I feel concerned, not because of Liam, because I know Liam, but I feel a concern that that parent would feel comfortable, because that also would be a sign that they're comfortable with other situations. I know sleepovers are a whole other thing, but when we talk about the people who we love and we're close to, you know, I trust Liam, but it's like we, as just having this broader awareness of access and awareness is just so important. And it's not always, it's not personal. It's like a, you know, it's a broader protective outlook.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I mean, look, my daughter did have sleepovers and she did have people sleep over. Generally, my husband was FIFO. So when we had a sleepover at my house, it was just me there. And it wasn't on purpose. I mean, he was there a couple of times, but it was more like, oh, it's girls' weekend, like let's have a sleepover kind of thing. But also, I was always very sure and very confident in saying to parents, this is the rules. They don't have their device after this time. There's no, you know, they're not going to be watching anything above like this rated movie. They're not going to be allowed to do any of these things. They're going to be in, you know, I'm going to make sure they're in bed by this time. And I was it didn't make for very fun sleepovers as she got older because her friends were like, oh, this is boring. But but you know what? That was what I was comfortable with. And those were the rules that I was okay with and I set in place. You know, and the same with when she went to other people's houses. It was like, who's going to be there? Is there supervision? What are the sleeping arrangements? Is there going to be any older siblings or any older? Is there any chance of anyone dropping in? Yeah. You know, how can you ensure my child's safety whilst they're in your care?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's not a lot of people. Oh, and I get so frustrated with parents. They just dump and run. Like they don't even meet the other parent sometimes. Right. They just like drop them off to the house. See ya. And is that because I don't think people necessarily don't love their kids, but they really are oblivious, or they're so excited about not having to deal with their child for a 24-hour period or whatever. I sometimes, and like I have had these moments where I'm like, I'm done with parenting. Like I'm ready to, like my daughter's nearly 18. I'm like, when does this end? Yes. You know, like I finally get my life back. According to my mother, I'll never get my life back. But, you know, the thing is that I know that parenting can be hard. We want to have a break. We need time out. We want to get away from it. But when we had that child, we took on a duty, an honor. We chose to have these kids and bring them into this world, and it's our duty, regardless of how we feel, to make sure that they're safe.
Exactly.
Well, that's the perfect place to end it. Kristy, thank you so much for sharing these insights. It is remarkable to talk to someone with so much experience and expertise in this field, and these are conversations that we will continue to have. We will elevate all the conversations that you are having. You have an amazing podcast called Conversations with Kristy that I would recommend absolutely everyone who listens to this episode checking out. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to the Evolving Love podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and leave a comment on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback and support fuels our passion, and together we're building a community of curiosity, kindness, and growth.
Subscribe, comment, and let's keep the conversation going.